Well, look, let me say goodbye to the president. I want to bring on our next guest. His name is James Austin Johnson. You may have caught some of his work on, I guess it's on YouTube or on Twitter. Uh,
Mostly Twitter and Instagram. It's mostly Twitter and Instagram. Yeah.
uh, James, it's such a pleasure to have you here. I cannot thank you enough for allowing us to have that moment of therapy for Judy Gold. She has
Yeah, that
been,
was incredible. I
I
haven't
think,
laughed that hard in like a long
honestly, I think we just
time.
added like 3 years to her life with the
That's
with the
good.
stress relief that you provided. So, dude, it's a real pleasure to have you here. How did you like? I mean, I don't know. I guess people stumble on to the fact they can do. Did you know you could do Donald Trump impression before he became president?
You know what? No, I probably started in 2015 or 2016, and I think I had the same reaction that everyone did immediately as comedians started doing Donald Trump, which is like, that's the most hack impression you could ever do. Why would I work on a Christopher Walken or a Michael McDonald? You know, why would I do Donald Trump? It's hack. But in general, just like as a comedian, I've always done impressions, probably longer than I've done stand up, but I wanted to be taken seriously as a stand up, so I just never really pushed it on the impressions thing. And it's just hearing that voice every day for hours for years. I couldn't help but attempt it. You know what? And if Sam Elliott was president, it would be Sam Elliott right now.
I mean, the
But
touch of "excuse me" is like the thing that gets me because that is just such a specific part
oh
of
man,
his
nothing.
rather speech.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, nothing pisses him off more than like a strong woman trying to like bulldoze him, and he does this like calm down thing that I don't know what it is, but his tactics for controlling anybody and dominating anybody are kind of the exact same. But it seems like, especially with any time a great journalist who's a woman like attacks him, he does this like, hey, mamacita, please. Hey, okay, listen, excuse me. I love that little. I like when he goes down. I normally keep it at rally Trump, a pretty high wavelengths, lots of screaming. But when he gets calm and Luther Vandross and sexy, I mean that's fun too. I love those tones too.
Oh yeah, it's sexy as hell.
Super sexy guy,
Yeah, it
just
just oozes.
oozes.
Lots of oozing. Yeah.
So, James, where are you from?
I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and Oklahoma City, and I'm now based in Los Angeles. I've been in Los Angeles since about 2011, and but my wife and I, go back and forth from Nashville to Tennessee pretty frequently. From Nashville to Los Angeles pretty frequently. So it's been an interesting time to have a foot in both a Republican stronghold and a hippie granola crunchy socialist prison, as Tennesseans think of Los Angeles. And I'm like,
Uh,
you should come hang out in Orange County. You'd like it a lot.
I mean, do you feel oppressed when you're out there and then free when you get back to Nashville?
Quite the opposite. You know what I like about Los Angeles is the freedom to be a freak. Like if I want to walk down a street in Los Angeles and record myself as Donald Trump screaming about like Taika Waititi, I can. And there's always somebody freakier and weirder doing something much louder and stranger nearby to distract anybody normal who would think that's weird. But we were just in Tennessee for a couple months with our families, and the stares that I get for doing anything out of the norm is so, in these places that are like very libertarian and Republican and individualistic, you absolutely must conform to a normal way of living and dressing. They talk a really big game about individualism, but if you do something cool and fun and unique, man, that is hated and quashed by the social infrastructure as quickly as possible.
Did you do stand up? Were you doing stand up in Tennessee? Like I'm obviously not in the past. I hope not so much. You've been laying off it for the past couple of months, but But prior to COVID, were you doing stand up there? Do you get political at all? Were you doing your? I mean, what I'm curious
Yeah, I
as to what
mean,
you're.
in the before times, I definitely was doing. I would go back to like clubs in the South and stuff every once in a while, and I mean, you can't just do hip alt rooms and coffee shops and stuff. You have to do every kind of venue, or you're not, doing your duty. But yeah, I would go back. I would do Trump stuff. I try to be as pretty goofy and just general comedy as possible in my act. But the last like few years, especially growing up super Christian, super conservative, I had to start confronting some of these, these sort of these movements and these things in our times. And so I broach those subjects, and some stuff really works. It's fun to see something that connects with a crowd that you weren't with a Baptist crowd that you weren't expecting to connect with. And then some of the stuff really, really does not, but you just got to plunge ahead. I mean,
Wait, is it the case that you started on like the Christian comedy circuit?
yeah, well, it's not so much a circuit as just whatever stage is available and whatever mic is hot. But yeah, I was a teen Christian stand-up comedian from like 14 to 18. I probably performed maybe 15 or 20 times total.
But what does that mean? So you would do, I don't know, I guess like church.
Churches, block parties, Christian colleges. I did a riverboat one time.
So what was your
Anything?
comedy?
Yeah.
Was your comedy at that time? I mean, I don't. Maybe it still is.
Yeah.
Is it? Was it like? Are you telling Christiany specific jokes, or is it just like you were clean? Like it wasn't like you were going to like a plumber's convention. You were like, hey, can you believe the new soldering stuff they have these days? Like,
Right. No, it's definitely in that clean zone. I mean, those are a lot of the comics that I grew up on were like conservative-ish, Christian-ish branded comedians. But
like who would that?
like my first love is this guy, and it's so strange because he's really changed, as a lot of the guys of that generation have changed over the course of the last 20 years or so. I was really into Brad Stein. That was probably the first comedian I was really into. He's got albums like Wussification, A Conservative Unleashed, Rebel Without a Curse. You know what? I was asked this question all the time. I heard the men around me asking the same question all the time as I was growing up. Why aren't there more Christian comedians? Oh, I heard Jeff Foxworthy converted to Christianity. That's cool. Hopefully he cleans up his act. At some point, I heard that comment morph into, why aren't there more conservative comedians? So even in Christian settings, they are not caring so much about getting Christian values affirmed as they are conservative values.
That's interesting.
Seeing
is that what you meant? Is that what you meant when you said that they've changed? That these like
yes,
sort of like
100%.
people who were playing to Christian audiences
kept politics out of it.
James, do you know Pete
fascinating.
Holmes? Are you familiar with Pete Holmes' stuff? I
Yeah,
watched that show
Pete Holmes.
Crashing a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, Pete Holmes is that's an interesting guy. Definitely when I was sort of getting out of church world, his podcast talked a lot about those themes about like extracting yourself from conservative spaces like that, and that was very, very helpful at the time.
I need to introduce Sam. I just want to say real quick, I need to introduce Sam to Brad Stein, actually, because I think, Sam, you'll get a kick out of this guy, because it is a lot of just right-wing comedy,
he used to just be a club comic, and then now it's all like the pussification of America and like all of these themes that are just like made up, the war on Christmas, stuff that exists only virtually, only in the minds of people for many years. I only heard this in hushed tones at dinner conversations. Social media is where all of this codified and turned into like, an actual movement of people. It's very strange. Like even Brad Stein performs a lot at these Promise Keepers conventions. If you're familiar, this is hotter in the 90s. But Promise Keepers is kind of a big group of dads who get together and promise not to masturbate. And he would perform at these men's empowerment conventions, and even that masculinity movement has really shifted to see how all of that has incorporated bodybuilding and QAnon and like conspiracy theories, and you know, all of those like fringe things are coming together when they used to seriously just be these conventions of guys getting together and being like, your wedding ring means a promise. It means that you love your wife. Like they were just affirming general normative good stuff. And now it's this like anti-gay sort of like militant thing. I really do not recognize a lot of the Christian subcultures that I came up in. It feels really weird. I do a lot of material about how it feels really weird to interact in those Jesus spaces these days. A lot of people feel alienated from them. And everyone of my generation that came up in that world is like, can I still go to church? I don't agree with any of these people anymore, like on anything.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think like my sense is that the comedy world, just broadly speaking, has become more political. And I guess I've been more conscious of it, you know, in terms of like the left, where comedians are actively engaged in politics. It was not the case 15, 16 years ago, you know, when Janine and I started to do Air America, like our comedian friends who were all, you know, the lefties were still like, what are you doing? You know, like, why would you do this? And, you know, the idea of doing comedy and mixing politics, it's like, you can't, you know, you need to service the comedy only as opposed to any of the politics. And it hadn't occurred to me that was happening on the right, particularly with Christian comedy. I mean, to be honest with you, I was not up on Christian comedy when it was, I guess, in its heyday.
How dare you?
But
how dare you not be familiar with
that's
a
fascinating
fringe channel deep in the Sirius XM bank?
I have a lot of you like in terms of like people who grew up in that like evangelical. Are you evangelical?
See, stuff like born again and evangelical, we never used any words like that. I wouldn't even know if we were. When I think of the word evangelical, I think of Baptists. I grew up in what's called the Church of the Nazarene, which is very different from Baptists. There are so many theological things to parse and separate yourself from other churches when you're in Christianity, in deep with it. And so, you know what, I never, let me put it this way. I never felt like I belonged to the world of the like overly made up and Botoxed people hawking magic water on TBN. That never felt like our world ever. You know what I mean? Like we weren't super involved with, you know, running up and down the aisles. Actually, the church that I grew up in was very anti, you know, tongues and doing cartwheels and stuff. So you can, once you get into it, you know what I mean? It's like rock and roll. Emo is very different from alt country. And basically they're the same thing, you know, 4 instruments and a drum set or whatever. But it gets very, very different when you're actually in that world. It's the best way I can sum it up.
And it was but your family were Republican and conservative. I mean, so that was sort of but
yeah,
I mean,
but you didn't talk about it. It was like a thing you assumed. It was a private thing that you did every 4 years. You didn't talk about it, you know, like the analogy about sex. It wasn't a thing that anyone acknowledged. Has been very interesting to see the lines be drawn in the sand. And definitely Trump was kind of one of the first times we really started talking about it as a family. At least the kinds of different people in the family describing what kind of Republican they were, what kind of voter they were.
What happened with your family in terms of like this era?
You know, a couple people became very like, I'm just going to say it. I'm voting for Trump and I'm into it. And then I would say 80% of the other people were like, let's do that and not talk about it. And then me and like 3 other cool cats were like, no, bad. We're the left-wing people in the family. Bad. There were some blow-ups between me and family members, but a lot of that I'm going to actually say is on me. I mean, I was filled with left-wing anger when I saw Trump, especially coming from that Christian world, seeing someone so uncharitable, unscrupulous, somebody who didn't represent a single Christian value sort of taking over my church, it ultimately underlined the fact that it wasn't my church anymore. Like it just ended up reaffirming my decisions to leave and leave it to them. So it was a good thing. I mean, overall, I think it will turn out to have been a good thing. Nobody likes to throw up, but your body wants to vomit for a reason. I think this was 4 years of vomiting. And, you know, it seems like we have ejected a considerable amount of poison. But it also just highlighted a bunch of other stuff that's not going to go away. I think that was very valuable too. And eventually I made peace with those family members. I told them early on, I was like, you're going to regret this decision. You're going to regret this guy. He's going to blow it for you. And I think his presidency speaks for itself in that respect. And it also kind of taught me not to take leaders that seriously in general. Life's too short. And we have to be kind to each other on our own. I mean, that is something that we have to do as a society. I don't know. It's good now. I think it's good now. Everybody's good now. I don't know. I don't know. It was uncomfortable there for a minute. You know what's interesting is they hated the Trump voice the first few years. They thought it was very disrespectful and it made everyone really queasy. By the end of the presidency, they were asking me to do, like this past Christmas, they were asking me to do Trump anytime we were all together. The same funny. People that were the most vocally supportive of him. To me, I would sum that up as ultimately lost a ton of respect for him over the course of his decisions and behaviors and policies. That's what I thought would happen. And I'm glad that I could do my disrespectful voice and speak truth to power in whatever minuscule way it is. I don't care about changing anybody's minds about Trump. I only care about releasing the valve. What you were kind of talking about, like, what's the duty of a comedian? Should we talk about politics or should we not? Ultimately, we just got to be true to ourselves, right? And if we're more political than we were a few years ago and we're being authentic, comedy should come out of that. If we're being inauthentic, being preachy, didactic, pedantic, comedy starts to be obscured by, I think, by putting on a front. But if we're speaking from the heart and being ourselves, that should connect with audiences. I think that's what I found with Trump was being authentic. I thought he was ridiculous, but when I just started playing him as ridiculous instead of someone I hated, it became really fun for me and for audiences, I think.
Well put. Well, James, what are you up to? The comedians I know right now, I mean, same a lot with the musicians and whatnot, that it's a very tough time. Obviously they can't work, at least in the same way. I mean, you've figured out a way of getting out there, and now Donald Trump has taken that away from you in some respect. Although I certainly would have you come on the show and do Donald Trump probably for the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, based upon how long I hung on to Catherine Harris, who was Secretary of State in the 2001 Florida election. But what are you doing? What can people, if people want to check out more of your stuff, what would they do?
Right. Well, I think, you know what, I think there's going to be a hunger for hearing Trump scream about Sonic the Hedgehog for many years to come. I think he will always be in our hearts and a source of aggravation that needs to be massaged. But if you want to watch the other comedy that I do, I have been a comedian for a lot longer than Trump has been president, and I do other comedy. Please find me at Shrimp, J-A-J, Shrimp, like my favorite protein, Shrimp, J-A-J, Shrimp Jaj on Twitter and Instagram. That's where I do a lot
Shrimp
of it.
Jaj. Right.
Shrimp Jaj. And you know what? The comedians right now, we're just preparing for that big Joe boom that he barely deserves. I mean, we're going to worship that guy once everything explodes and opens up and Hollywood starts spending money on performers like me again. I'm going to be so happy, and whoever's in charge during that is going to get a big garland parade. We're going to lift him up high on a chair That's what I am looking forward to, is whatever sort of cultural pep is reintroduced as things even out and we can, enjoy going to the grocery. I used to like going to the grocery store. I'm really looking forward to that.
James Austin Johnson, thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. You're a wonderful person, and Judy and all of them, Chelsea and Richard, wonderful, wonderful people.
I have no idea.
Great Americans. America Report. Listen to America Report every Thursday at 9 p.m. Or you can just change it or whatever you want to do.
All right. Well, yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you. All right. We'll see you later. In other words, there we go. Well,